Good afternoon. Come on in and have a seat. We have plenty of seats up front. Welcome to Convocation. How many of you are here because you're enrolled in the class? Raise your hand. Good. Welcome back. Okay, today we have a special Martin Luther King's commemoration. And we are very honored to have with us Pastor France Davis, who is also a member of the Utah State Board of Regents. But before we get to that, I just have a few announcements. If everyone could take out their cell phones and please turn them off. This is recorded, so we don't want any interference. Also, if you're a student taking this class for credit, make sure that you go on Canvas and fill out a quick survey before tomorrow night at midnight. Also, if you have not yet taken your student agreement, you can find that on Canvas as well. And additionally, if you still don't have a yellow card to take attendance, you can get it after class at the table in the back of the hall. Okay, next week we will be honored to hear from Dr. Jose Reyes, who is an internationally acclaimed nuclear engineer. He will be speaking to us. And then let's just get started. I'm going to turn the time over now to Isel Perez. She is the SBA representative for diversity and inclusion, and she will be introducing our guest speaker.
Pastor Francis Davis is a former member of the Salt Lake Community College Board of Trustees and has served as pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Salt Lake City since 1974. He holds degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, Westminster College, University of Utah, and Northwest Nazarene University. He teaches communications and ethics studies courses at the University of Utah. Pastor Davis is the author of several books, including Light in the Midst of Zion and France Davis, An American Story Told. He has received numerous honors for his service, including USU Community Service Award, as well as honorary degrees from the University of Utah, Salt Lake Community College, and Dixie State College. He currently serves as Vice Chair of the Utah State Board of Regents. We are honored to have him as our Martin Luther King Jr. commemoration speaker. Please join me in welcoming Pastor Francis Davis.
I'm going to learn to walk instead of running. It's my delight to be here, and what a pleasure. I want to thank Isel for that introduction, and I'm glad my wife is here, so now she knows who I am, and she'll know from now on how to really treat me every chance that she gets. I'm delighted to be on Snow College campus one more time and have the opportunity to talk to you about Martin Luther King Jr. I want to do four things. First of all, I want to talk to you a bit about my own connections personally with Dr. Martin Luther King, and then I want to say a few things about Utah's connection to Dr. Martin Luther King, and then lastly, thirdly, I want to suggest some things that you can do as we celebrate this holiday in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, and then lastly, leave a little time to interact with you and to answer some questions and to comment on things that you want to do. Does that sound fair to everybody? How about the rest of you? Does it sound fair to everybody? Great, great. Let's get started then. First of all, I was born and reared about 100 miles south of where Martin Luther King Jr. was born, in Georgia, during the same general time period that Dr. Martin Luther King was born. Now, when I say same general time period, I'm talking about the time period that's called separate but equal. Who knows what that means? Separate but equal. All right, great, great. Some of you know what that means. What it meant to me was that every school that I went through my first college experience, was a school that had only African Americans. And by the way, can I remind you that there were only two groups of people that lived in America during that time frame. Those two groups of people were either people who were light-skinned enough to be considered white only, or people who were dark-skinned enough to be considered colored. And those were the two terms that defined all of the people that lived in the United States of America. So if you happen to have been Hispanic, for example, and you were a dark-skinned Hispanic, you could be classified as a colored, or Native American, or Asian, or any of those other groups. And there were some African Americans who were light-skinned enough that they would be considered as white, and they could in fact pass for white. But there were only two groups of people that lived in America during that time. Either you were colored or you were white only. And so I grew up during that time frame. And then when I finished high school, I decided to go to college and went to a little college called Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University. Anybody ever heard anything about Tuskegee? You know anything about Tuskegee? There's one thing that as a Snow College student, if you're going to graduate and maintain your self-respect, you have to know at least one thing about Tuskegee. What was that? Sorry, thought you were saying. Anybody know what that one thing is that you have to know about Tuskegee if you're going to have self-respect as a graduate from Snow College? George Washington Carver. He's connected to the one thing that I want you to know, but what's the one thing that I want you to know that George Washington Carver did, invented? Peanut butter. Peanut butter. Now, I said that the other day to a group of BYU students, and when I said that, they said that they eat lobster tail and steak. They don't eat peanut butter. But maybe they're different than you are. But when I was in college, peanut butter was the meal of the day. Everybody ate peanut butter. And whenever we ate peanut butter, we remembered George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and Tuskegee. And while at Tuskegee, Martin Luther King came to campus, and I, as a reporter for my school newspaper, was able to interview him one-on-one. Can I tell you two or three things that I discovered about Dr. King? Number one, I discovered he was not very handsome. He had a big head, he had broad shoulders, and a little body. He didn't look like much. But listen, when he opened his mouth, you knew that you were in the presence of a well-educated, of a great charismatic leader, a tremendous person who cared about other people. So I met Dr. Martin Luther King in person, and then 50 years ago, this March, I was one of those people who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Anybody seen the movie yet, Selma? It hadn't come here yet? When is it coming to snow? We don't know? But you ought to see the movie Selma. It's about that march from Selma, Alabama, 40 miles, that we marched, some 8,000 of us marched for voting rights. And I was there when Martin Luther King said, "How long? Not long. For truth crushed to the ground will rise again. How long? Not long. For you shall reap what you sow. How long? Not long. For mine eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord, and his truth is marching on." I was there when he delivered that speech. 50 years ago, this March, we will celebrate the birthday of the time that we marched from Selma to Montgomery. And so I had a personal connection with Dr. Martin Luther King, and many of his family has visited with us in Salt Lake City since his death. Well, that's enough about me and my connection. Can I tell you two or three things that maybe you don't know about the connection of Utah and Dr. Martin Luther King? Congress passed a law declaring that the third Monday in January would be a legal public holiday called the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. Anybody want to guess at what Utah's reaction was to that law? Utah was one of 7 states that said that the federal law that passed Congress does not apply to us, and we are not going to acknowledge and honor the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. So I went up to the legislature, and I said to the legislature, you guys have to do this. And they said, we don't have to. And they gave me 3 main reasons why in Utah they did not have to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King. The first reason they gave was Martin Luther King never came to Utah. Does anybody know whether he ever came to Utah or not? Absolutely he came to Utah. In fact, the story is so interesting, you'll find this of interest. He came on his way to Salt Lake to speak at the University of Utah, and he got off the airplane in Denver, Colorado to make a phone call. People didn't have cell phones back in those days. You had to find a pay phone and put money in it and then make your phone call. So he got off the airplane and got left. And so Dr. J.D. Williams, a professor of political science at the University of Utah, held the audience for 2 hours while Martin Luther King chartered an airplane and flew to Salt Lake City. And his picture is on the front page of the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News, having been in Salt Lake City. So I showed that to the legislators, and they backed off. And then they said to me, but he was a womanizer and a drunken. Where did that come from? Anybody know? Where did that idea come from? Mr. J. Edgar Hoover labeled Martin Luther King Jr. as a communist, and he was in charge of the FBI. And when he did that, he also assigned agents to follow Dr. Martin Luther King everywhere he went. And so if Martin Luther King checked in room 101, the FBI would check in 102, and they would bug the room that Martin Luther King was in. And if they heard him grunt, they would say, oh, he's got a woman in there. Or if they heard him slur a word, they'd say, he's drinking. And they called him a womanizer and a drunk. 50 years after a federal record has been created, FBI record, you can request the release of that record. And we requested the release of those records and found that there's no evidence, even in Mr. Hoover's agent's own records, of Martin Luther King being a womanizer or being a drunk. So I presented that to the legislators, and they backed off. And they said, oh, we got you on this other one. We got one other reason why we should not have a holiday to honor Martin Luther King in Utah. We don't have a holiday to honor Utah's #1 citizen, Brigham Young. Anybody, do we have a holiday to honor Brigham Young? Well, you could say the 24th of July is the day to honor him, but it's really not in many ways. So here's what I said to the legislators. Tell you what, legislators, I'll agree with you. We don't have a holiday to honor Brigham Young, so do me a favor. You give us Brigham City and name it Martin Luther King City, and then you can have a holiday for Brigham Young. You think they did that? Absolutely not. They backed off in a hurry, and they said, oh, no way are we going to change the name of Brigham City to Martin Luther King City. So eventually, Senator Terry Williams, Representative Robert Sykes, Dr. Forrest Crawford, who was the special assistant to the president at Weber, and myself as chairman of the committee, pushed a bill through the Utah State Legislature, and Utah then voted to have a day set aside, the third Monday in January, and they called it Human Rights Day. Anybody know what's wrong with that? What's wrong with having the third Monday in January as Human Rights Day? We already have a Human Rights Day in December. So why have 2 Human Rights Days? So we talked to the legislature, and finally, a few years ago, they changed the day, and they labeled it now Martin Luther King holiday. And so we have a Martin Luther King holiday, and the legislature moved their starting time from the third Monday in January to the fourth Monday in January as a way of them acknowledging the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So there's the Utah connection. Now, what ought individuals, what ought our communities do to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King? I've got 5 suggestions for you. You may want to write these down, those of you who are in the class and those of you who are going to try to follow up, because these are practical kinds of things that you can do. Number 1, to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King, do what Martin Luther King had everybody who marched with him do. The first thing he had us do was had us find out as much as we could about ourselves. You have to know who you are yourself in order to be able to go out and deal with other people's problems, other people's issues, other people's identity. And one of the reasons we can't get along with people who are different than us is that we don't know who we are ourselves. So you have to find out who you are yourself. Do some research. Study about your family. Learn to tell your own stories. Learn to sing your own song. But do some things to find out who you are yourself. Second thing, find out as much as you can about people who are different than you. I was taken aback and so disappointed the other day. I went to court. And by the way, I, as a minister, go to court probably as much as the average lawyer do to stand with people who go to court. So I go to court, and the judge calls a case and tries his best to pronounce the name of a Hispanic client, a Hispanic person that was coming, and just butchered the name of, you ought to take the time. If you have a person appearing in your office, you are a doctor, a lawyer, a judge, to find out who it is that's coming. And if it's somebody that's got a strange name, then you ought to find the time to figure out what that name is and how to pronounce it. You ought to be able to say Gonzalez instead of Guns whatever. But the judge had not taken the time to find out who the clients were that were coming before him, even to find out how to pronounce their names. I was taken aback. But we have to find out all we can about ourselves, all we can about other people. And once you've done that, then the third thing you do is you have to prepare yourself for whatever you're going to do, as if everything you're going to do depends upon you. Prepare yourself as if you're the only one working on the issue. Study. Go on the job training. Do everything you can to prepare yourself so that you'll be ready when it comes time to act. But if you're not prepared, when the time comes to act, you'll be caught off guard. Now, Martin Luther King is my example of a person who prepared as if everything depended upon him. For example, when Martin Luther King was 5 years old, he was kicked out of school for the first time. At 5 years old, the day after his birthday. Why do you suppose he was kicked out of school at 5 years old, when he turned 5 years old? He was kicked out of school because he was the best reader in the first grade class at 4 years old, and nobody knew that he wasn't old enough to be going to school until he bragged that he had 5 candles on his cake, and they kicked him out of school at 5 years old. When Martin Luther King finished middle school, his teacher took the class the last week of school to the library and said to the whole class, check out one book that you have not read. Who'd like to guess over here at the title or the subject or the author of the book that Martin checked out? Just one of you. Anybody in the middle want to guess at the title of the book, the subject of the book, or the author of the book that Martin checked out? The dictionary. How about over here? You want to take a guess at that? What book did Martin check out when the teacher said, every student check out one book that you have not read? What? He did not. Why didn't he? He had read every book in his school's library. He had read every book in his school's library. Now how about a challenge? You good for a challenge? You all students at Snow College. How many of you read every book in Snow College. Let's assume there are 100 books in Snow College Library. You are halfway through the school year. How many books of those 100 would you have to read per day in order to read that 100 books before the end of this semester? But what if there are 1,000 books in the Snow Library? Or what if there are 10,000 books in Snow's library? Or what if there are 100,000 books in Snow College Library? How many would you have to read by the time you earn your AA degree? But Martin Luther King, as a middle schooler, had read every book in his school's library. At 15 years old, he had graduated from high school. At 18 years old, had earned his first college bachelor's degree. At 25 years old, had earned the highest degree that you can earn, called a PhD. He was well prepared. And so when the ground swelled in Montgomery, Alabama, and Mrs. Rosie Parks said, "I am not going to give up my seat anymore." And the people in Montgomery says, "We are not going to give up our seat anymore." Martin Luther King was ready to step in and be the leader because he had prepared as if it all depended upon him. So the first thing is, learn all you can about yourself. Secondly, learn all you can about other people. Thirdly, prepare as if everything depends upon you. And then the fourth thing is, learn how to shape and cast a vision. The unique thing about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, you heard part of it a few moments ago, is that last part of his speech where he says, "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Dreaming is another way of talking about visioning. Dreaming and visions are ways of seeing what has not yet happened. You've all come to Snow College dreaming that you're going to pass your English course, dreaming that you're going to pass your math course, dreaming that you're going to pass your biology course, dreaming that you're going to graduate one day. You've got to learn how to cast that vision. And Martin Luther King was a master at it. And then lastly, I suggest to you that once you decide that you've got a vision to cast, you ought to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. by having a servant attitude. It is not what's in it for me, but what's in it for those that are around me. If I don't help every other person to reach their fullest potential, I will never be able to reach my own fullest potential. You'll never be all you can be as long as others around you are not all they can be. The possibilities are measureless, but you have to help others to reach. You have to have a servant attitude. How can I help others to reach their potential? Now, you look at me rather strange when I say that, but can I remind you that, listen, Martin Luther King, one of the things that Martin Luther King did was made sure that African Americans and other people of color did not have to sit only in the back of the bus. You know he did that? Well, he didn't have to ride on a bus. Martin Luther King's father had a brand new Cadillac. Martin himself had a brand new car. He didn't have to ride on the bus, so what's he worried about the buses for? He's trying to help others to be able to reach their potential and have all that's available to them. And he did it by somehow helping to integrate our society and bring us to a place where we all have worth, we all have value, and there's something to celebrate in everybody's culture. The first year I was in Utah, I was recruited from UC Berkeley. They read a story about the chair of the communication department read a story about a crazy UC Berkeley student that was taking 75 hours of college credit per semester. And they read this story, and he called me in the middle of the day, and he said, if you're crazy enough to take 75 hours of college credit per semester as a student at UC Berkeley, then you're crazy enough to take a job in Utah. And I asked him to jingle the bag of money, and he jingled it, and I heard it, and I took the job in Utah. And I came here some 42 years ago. And my first year I was here, I ate every day at the Chuckarama. Anybody ever eat at the Chuckarama? What do they do at the Chuckarama? They have everything at the Chuckarama. They've got salads galore. You name it, they've got a salad made out of it. They've got meats galore. They have vegetables galore. They've got more starches than your arteries can maintain, even if they just rush through. They've got every kind of drink that you can name. Why would I eat at Chuckarama? Because the variety made it exciting. Because of the different foods that were available, made it possible for me to eat whatever I wanted to eat. And I ate at Chuckarama. And today, I eat steak, and tomorrow I eat chicken, and next time roast beef, and then I eat fish. I ate what I wanted by going to a place that had a variety. And it's all of us are here as students, as staff at Snow College, and the variety is what makes it exciting and interesting. And I suggest to you, that's what Martin Luther King was all about. He was not just about African Americans, but he was about every person in the American society being recognized as a person, being treated as if they have worth and value, and celebrating the differences that we have. And students, that's what we've got to do. Here at Snow College, you've got students from a number of different countries, a number of different backgrounds and experiences, but they all have worth. They all have value. They all have something to offer. And when you learn, take the time to learn from those who are different from you, what they have to offer, as well as what you already know, then you become a well-educated, a well-rounded student, and you're ready to go out and face the society. Here's my final suggestion, and then I want to take some questions for you. My final suggestion is that you remember that all of us, as citizens of this society, as members of this society, we've come here thinking about the idea of a melting pot society. And what a melting pot society suggests is that we're all in the same boat together. I was talking to a young man named Jack Heslov. Jack is an avid fisherman. He and his son went fishing one day down at the Utah Lake. Anybody ever been fishing at the Utah Lake? Great catfish, great bass. They were there fishing, and they were in the boat fishing, and as they were fishing, Jack's son stood up on one end of the boat and pointed toward his dad's feet and began to laugh. And his dad said to him, "Stop that laughing now. You're going to scare the fish." And his son laughed even the louder and the more and pointed even the more at his dad's feet as he stood up on his end of the boat laughing and pointing toward his dad's feet. His dad said, "Now, you scared the fish. That's it. No more fishing today. Roll in your line." And as his son began to roll his line in, and as his line got closer and closer to the boat, his dad said to them, "By the way, what are you pointing and laughing at?" What are you pointing and laughing at? And his son said to them, "Dad, your end of the boat is leaking." "Dad, your end of the boat is leaking." He was suggesting that his dad's end of the boat was going to take on more water than it could hold, and it was going to go down. That's what happens when a boat starts leaking, right? It takes in water, and the water becomes more in the boat, and soon the boat becomes consumed by the water, and the boat goes down. But he said to his dad, your end of the boat is leaking. And I suggest to you that many people in the American society have said, it's those immigrants' problem. It's their end of the boat that's leaking. It's those Native Americans that's got the problem. It's their end of the boat that's leaking. It's those African Americans that are complaining that they can't register and vote. And it's their end of the boat that's leaking. But can I ask you a question? Suppose it is my end of the boat that's leaking. And suppose you are in the same boat as I. And suppose my end of the boat does take on more water than it ought to be, and suppose my end of the boat goes down. What's going to happen to your end of the boat? It's going down too. And we are all in this American boat together. And unless each of us make sure that nobody else's end of the boat is leaking, all of us are going down together. Martin Luther King said it in these words: in order to keep another man in the ditch, you'll have to stay there with him. So students, my suggestions is that as we celebrate this birthday of a gigantic, tremendous, matchless American, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that we do it by first finding out who we are ourselves. Secondly, finding out who others are. Thirdly, preparing as if everything that needs to be done depends upon us. Fourthly, waiting till the ground swells and casting a vision, and then doing what you do with a servant attitude. What can I do that will not only benefit me, but will help others to reach their fullest potential? I heard an interesting story about Snow College. I was up at Wasatch, which is right down the road here at Mount Pleasant. And somebody was suggesting to me that the reason Snow College was placed here was so that students who live in this county and area would have an opportunity to get higher education. The state of Utah has determined that by the year 2020, if a young person wanting a job does not have at least a certificate beyond high school, they will not be able to secure a job. So it's time for us to take care of ourselves, prepare, and then be ready to dream. Thank you. I promised that I would do 4 things. I've done 3 of them. I'd now be delighted to interact with any of you who have questions or who have comments, or if you just want to vent for a moment. We're not going to let you vent all day because there may be others who want to vent. But if you got a few things that you want to ask about, my experience with Dr. King, what the march from Selma to Montgomery was like, or what Utah has been doing or needs to do, or what education in Utah ought to look like, I'd be delighted to interact with you. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, if Dr. King was still with us today, what do you think he would have to say about the current state of quality in the U.S.?
Great question. If Dr. King were alive today, what do I think he would have to say about the current state of affairs in terms of equality in our society today? I think he'd say, first of all, loudly and clearly, we've made a lot of progress and gotten a lot of laws on the books, but we haven't gotten attitudes changed. We still need to get people with better attitudes about equality. I think he would point specifically, for example, to the way we talk about the President of the United States. When I was a child, if you said the things that people are saying on radio and TV about Mr. Obama, they'd come get you and haul you away, never to be seen again. But nowadays, we can say anything about our leaders and just throw them away. I think he would say that we've got to change our attitudes. Secondly, I think he would say we've got to do more to ensure the safety and the well-being of our young so that they are not facing constant violence. Violence sometimes within the community, violence from the authorities. The Ferguson situation, for example, the Saratoga Springs in Utah situation, the New York's. I think he would be really stressed out and upset about the level of violence. You know, by the way, that last year in Chicago, Illinois, how many days in a year? 365 days in a year, and there were more than 365 young African Americans who lost their lives to a gun in Chicago alone. I think he'd be bothered by that, and he'd say something about that. And then I think he'd also say that, listen, we've got to make room for people who have come from other places, because aside from the Native Americans, where did all of us come from? Other places. And so we've got to do something about the immigrant problem as we face our future. Other questions? Yes. To the film. The film. Oh, Selma. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I'm going to go see it, but I'm going to see it with another motive. The question is, if I had something that I would add to the Selma movie, what would it be? But I haven't seen it. I'm going to go see it, but I'm going with a different motive. The motive I'm going to see Selma with is, how accurate is it to my memory? Since I was there, I want to know, when they're doing this, is that something that we did or not? So I'll let you know next time what I would add to it. All the way in the back. I'm with Martin Luther King. I joined his team. Many years ago. I decided that nonviolence was the best approach, as opposed to Malcolm X, who I met also, by the way. But I decided to take the Martin Luther King method. So I'm with King in that. I believe that we need to do more in Utah to get African Americans and people of color elected in the electoral processes. We only have 2 African Americans, for example, in the state legislature. And only one of those is elected. The other was appointed by the governor. So we need to do more about who's getting elected and running for office. We also need to do more to ensure that people have a livable wage when they get a job. Do you know, by the way, that of the people who live in Salt Lake County's shelter, Salt Lake City's shelter, live there, that there are many of those people who work 40 hours a week but don't make enough money to buy food, transportation, shelter, the basic needs. They don't make enough money, so they have to live in the shelter, and they're working 40 hours a week. Something's wrong with our society, and I'm convinced that until we change that, we all are going to be sinking. We all are going to have to pay for the medical care that people get who don't have medical insurance. So I believe that those are some issues that we still got to work on. When I interviewed Martin Luther King, what questions did I ask? First of all, I asked him about his education. I was a new student, and I had no idea about, I'd done a little research, but I didn't do. And I asked him about his method, nonviolence. I asked him about his role models, Gandhi and others who set the example for him. and I asked him how long he thought he could last. How do you think he answered that last question? How long can you continue on the route that you're on? He believed that he'd be dead almost any minute, that somebody would come along and kill him because of what he was doing. He was turning the world upside down, and he was really nervous that there were people who were sick, as he called them, that sick enough that they'd try to kill him. By the way, when I mentioned that, let me also remind you that there's a tomb of Martin Luther King. He's not buried in a graveyard. He's buried in a tomb on Auburn Avenue in downtown Atlanta. And this time of year, January and February, they have to hire 24-hour-a-day guards to guard his tomb, because there's still people who don't like what he did so much that they would even destroy his burial place. So those are some of the questions that I asked. I had a great time with him, though, because I was a young upstart. I didn't believe in nonviolence at the time, so he was persuasive, charismatic. Other questions? Yes. Yes. I said I met Malcolm X. What did I think about him? Can I compare the two guys, Malcolm and Martin? First of all, both of them were well educated, but educated in a different fashion and form. Martin was formally educated, degrees and PhD. Malcolm memorized the dictionary. If Malcolm used the word, you'd better go look it up and make sure you know how he used it, because he'd memorized it. He was a tremendous wordsmith, Malcolm was. Malcolm was bold, and he believed by any means necessary that if you don't give people the right to vote, they'll take it. So Malcolm was that kind of person. He was persuasive. I listened to him and sat on the edge of a wooden bleach. They call them bleachers. That was in the stadium we sat on the edge of those for 2.5 hours while Malcolm talked to us and begged him to continue. In my view, he was as good, if not a better speaker than Martin, but not as charismatic as Martin was. Malcolm X. Other questions? Yes. Help people to, in my experience, what's the best way for people to change their attitude? I'm a pastor of a church, and my book is the Bible, and the Bible says it takes 40 years for an attitude to change. So it takes time. So that's the first thing. You've got to give people time. You can change the law, but attitudes are going to take time. And so you got to work with it. Secondly, education is the number one usable tool to help people change their attitude. I found, let me give you a real example. I mentioned 4 people that helped us pass the Martin Luther King bill. One of them was Representative Robert Sykes. Anybody know that name? Anybody? He's been on TV recently. He's the one that has filed a lawsuit against the highway patrolman that abused people. He's the one that's recently filed a lawsuit against Saratoga Springs for killing the African-American man. And he's taking on all of those kind of cases now. But he was adamantly opposed to the Martin Luther King holiday. And Take Two Television invited he and I to come on television at 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night, and debate the issue about the Martin Luther King holiday. And I took the time to educate him about the purpose of the holiday during that half-hour debate. And at the end of the debate, Robert Sykes says to me, "What can I do to make sure this bill passed?" And he becomes the sponsor of the bill in the House. Education. So education. And then thirdly, relationships. People change their attitudes when they come to understand that the toilet in a black home flushes in the same direction as it does in a white. Or that pots on the stove are heated in the same way in a black home as they are in a Hispanic home. But we have to build relationships and spend time together and get to know each other. So those are some suggestions. Other questions? Okay, listen, there's one other thing that you have planned here. I'm going to participate with you in it. We're going to go out of this building and take a little walk around, a symbolic march, a symbolic walk around campus and 2 or 3 places, and then end up someplace that has been planned. But I want to urge as many of you as have the time, and I know you'd rather go to class, or you got to go to class, or something, or you paid to go to class. I know you'd rather do. But listen, we still have a few minutes before the class time is over, and if you can join and just go as far as you can, and then rush off to your class and study and prepare. Do all you can to be all you can. My father would say it this way: if a task is once begun, never quit until it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. Thank you for listening. You've been a great audience.
Thank you, Reverend Davis.